What if I told you that a nation with fewer people than many European cities walked onto football's biggest stage, stared down some of the richest teams on Earth, and refused to blink? A country scattered across 10 volcanic islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a place where football dreams often had to leave home before they could truly grow. A nation of just over 500,000 people. On paper, they had no business competing at the FIFA World Cup. But football has never been playing on paper. It is played on grass, under pressure, in moments when courage matters more than reputation. And when Cape Verde arrived at the 2026 FIFA World Cup, they reminded the world that sometimes the smallest stories leave the biggest mark. Because what happened next wasn't just unexpected, it was statistically unbelievable. There are countries with populations of 50 million, 80 million, even well over 100 million still dreaming of reaching a World Cup. Yet Cape Verde, with around 500,000 people, somehow stood among football's elite. To understand just how impossible that sounds, imagine trying to build a world-class football nation from a population smaller than cities like Liverpool, Manchester, or Lisbon. The player pool is tiny, financial resources are limited, stadiums are modest, youth academies cannot compete with Europe's football factories. Everything about the numbers says this story should never exist, and yet it does. But this miracle didn't begin at the World Cup. It began decades earlier when a new nation was still discovering its own identity. Cape Verde gained independence from Portugal in 1975. 3 years later, the national team played its very first international match, losing 1-0 to Guinea. There were no grand celebrations, no worldwide headlines, just a new country taking its first uncertain steps into international football. The Football Federation was established in 1982 and joined FIFA in 1986. But joining world football didn't suddenly solve the country's biggest challenge. There simply weren't enough players. For generations, many Cape Verdeans had emigrated abroad. Today, the Cape Verdean diaspora is actually larger than the population living on the islands themselves. Families settled across Portugal, France, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and beyond. Ironically, what once seemed like a disadvantage slowly became one of their greatest strengths. Young players developed inside European academies, learning modern football while never forgetting where their families came from. Every international call-up became more than just football. It became a journey back home. Still, outside Africa, almost nobody noticed. Cape Verde remained one of international football's best-kept secrets. In 2010, they stunned everyone by holding Portugal to a goalless draw in a friendly. At the time, Portugal ranked third in the FIFA World Rankings. Cape Verde sat far below them. Most people dismissed it as just another preseason exhibition. It wasn't. It was a warning. 3 years later came another shock. During qualification for the Africa Cup of Nations, Cape Verde eliminated Cameroon over 2 legs, earning their first ever place at AFCON. Suddenly, the tiny island nation was sharing the stage with Africa's football powers. Even then, they refused to play the role of underdog. They drew with host nation South Africa, drew with Morocco, beat Angola for their first AFCON victory, reached the quarterfinals in their tournament debut. They weren't simply surviving, they were competing. More qualification followed, more impressive performances. Then, in 2015, they defeated Portugal 2-0 away from home. The football world started paying attention. Years later, at the 2023 Africa Cup of Nations, Cape Verde once again exceeded expectations. They defeated Ghana. They comfortably beat Mozambique. They rescued a dramatic draw against Egypt with a stoppage-time equalizer. They reached another quarterfinal before eventually falling to South Africa in a heartbreaking penalty shootout. By now, one thing had become impossible to ignore. This wasn't luck. This was a football culture quietly growing stronger year after year. But the biggest surprise was still waiting. In October 2025, Cape Verde achieved something generations had only dreamed about. They qualified for the FIFA World Cup for the very first time. For most countries, qualification is the beginning of the story. For Cape Verde, many assumed it would also be the end. The World Cup is where football's smallest dreams often collide with football's biggest realities. Their group contained European champions Spain, South American giants Uruguay, and Saudi Arabia. On paper, experts predicted an early exit. Many expected heavy defeats. Some wondered whether Cape Verde would even score a goal. Then came the opening match. Spain dominated almost everything: the possession, the passing, the territory. Wave after wave of attacks crashed toward Cape Verde's goal. But every tackle carried belief. Every clearance bought another few seconds. Every save felt like another chapter in history. 90 minutes later, the scoreboard still read 0-0. Cape Verde hadn't simply survived. They had taken their first ever World Cup point against one of the strongest teams in world football. Suddenly, the impossible didn't feel so impossible anymore. And then came Uruguay. This time, Cape Verde did something even more remarkable. They scored. Not once, twice. Their first ever World Cup goals echoed far beyond the islands. Every celebration carried decades of hope. Uruguay responded. Cape Verde answered. When the final whistle arrived, it finished 2-2. Another unbeaten performance, another football giant frustrated. Across the football world, people began asking the same question: who exactly are Cape Verde? Commentators who had barely mentioned them before were now studying every player, every tactical decision, every incredible defensive performance. But fate wasn't finished testing them. Everything came down to the final group matches. After another disciplined performance against Saudi Arabia ended goalless, Cape Verde's players could do nothing except wait. Their future depended on the result between Spain and Uruguay. There were no giant television studios, no dramatic countdown shows, just players gathering around a mobile phone. One small screen, hundreds of thousands of beating hearts back home. Every Spanish attack brought hope. Every Uruguayan chance brought silence. Every passing minute felt longer than the last. Then, the final whistle. Spain had done enough. The players looked at one another before the realization spread across their faces. They had done it. Cape Verde had reached the knockout stage of the FIFA World Cup. A country of around 500,000 people had just advanced alongside the world's football superpowers. Imagine what that means. Some World Cup nations invest billions into football infrastructure. They possess enormous academies, elite sports science departments, and leagues worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Cape Verde had something different: connection, identity, belief. Their talent was scattered across continents. Their families stretched across the globe. Yet whenever the national anthem played, they became one small nation with one enormous dream. That's why this story matters far beyond football, because every generation is told that some things are simply impossible, that size determines success, that money guarantees greatness, that history belongs only to the powerful. Cape Verde challenged every one of those assumptions. They reminded us that football has always been the world's greatest equalizer, a game where courage can silence statistics, where discipline can frustrate superstars, where belief can overcome impossible odds. Millions of people watching around the world saw more than an underdog. They saw themselves, the overlooked, the underestimated, the ones who were told they were too small to matter. Cape Verde proved that greatness isn't measured by the size of your population, the wealth of your federation, or the reputation printed beside your name. Sometimes history belongs to the nation willing to dream long after everyone else has stopped believing. And that is why the story of Cape Verde will always be remembered, not because they were the smallest country at the World Cup, but because they showed the entire football world that the biggest victories are often achieved by those who were never expected to win it all.